Welcome, everyone, to another Wednesday evening with Clear Mountain. Today, we are blessed to be joined by Ayyā Ahiṃsā, who is one of our closest Bhikkhuni sisters. She was just visiting down here 2 weekends ago for seminary Junha's Pabaja going forth ceremony. And we've sort of intersected over these last few years here and there. And just recently, Ayyā has moved from the former Aloka Vihara to Canmore Theravada Buddhist Community, where she's now residing. And that puts her about 10 hours from us, but it still feels in the vicinity. And we're so grateful to have her nearby and just to develop this friendship more and more. And so she kind of decided to join us today, and we're just so grateful. And thank you, Ayyā, for your friendship and your time.
Thanks for having me, Ajahn.
And this is, I believe, to also introduce Bhikkhuni Bear behind you.
Oh yeah, Bear Cooney.
Bear Cooney, of course.
Yeah, sort of chipmunks.
Who sewed her a robe?
Anagarika Sarah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we had a children's program, and Bear Cooney gave the precepts.
That's great.
So the children were willing to take them.
Well, thank you, Ayyā, and Bear Cooney's free to answer questions as well for those who want to type them into the chat. So Ayyā, would you mind introducing yourself a bit and your just how you came into robes, and just give us a sort of a brief history of you, if you would.
Sure. Oops.
It's all right. She's looking dignified enough.
Yeah, so I came to practicing meditation later in life. When I was younger, I was a very serious classical musician, and I went to university on a music scholarship to a school in the United States, and ended up being recruited into a very, very fundamentalist, harsh church, and it kind of it derailed my life. And so in my mid-30s, I got out of being involved with that group and was pretty a-religious for a long time, and very nervous about religion, about dogma. And then in my mid-40s, I was on a soccer team, and there was a woman on the soccer team, and she was lovely, and we were out one night after a game, and she said something about this 3-month silent retreat, and I just was like, what? And asked her a bunch of questions about it. Just kind of blew my mind. And she was quite a serious practitioner. She'd done retreats in Burma with U Pandita, and so she told me about this meditation retreat at the University of British Columbia at the Asian Center. They had these weekend non-residential retreats. So off I went, and thankfully I had no idea it was Buddhist. I just thought I was going to learn meditation. And I still didn't, at the end of the retreat, know it was Buddhist. But I was hooked. It was, yeah. And the first full day, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for my entire life. The idea that you can go in and find truth, find beauty, find safety, that was completely radical to me. Fundamentalism invariably leads you out and makes you dependent on a source of truth and beauty that's outside. Yeah, it's absolutely the opposite, like going completely the opposite direction.
So, sorry.
Yeah, I was hooked. Yeah.
That's a fascinating articulation of the difference in trajectory. Why do you feel fundamentalism leads you out?
Because fundamentalism, we don't hear it talked about as much as I think that the third fetter that's cut when we experience stream entry is a wrong grasp of rites and rituals. That is fundamentalism. And there's a very strong force in the human mind that is that makes us susceptible. And we see it in our culture in all kinds of different ways. There's a sutta in the Anguttara Sixes about penetrative wisdom, and there's these things. It's a deep sutta. It's a long sutta, and the Buddha is saying that there are all these different things that we need to penetrate and really come to understand. And one of them is suffering. And in that description, he says that the uninstructed, the ignorant response to suffering, one is that we're just overwhelmed and perplexed, and we certainly see that. And the second is that one goes on a search outside of themselves, and they're looking for someone. And the sutta actually says that you go and ask people, do something. So give me a mantra, like fix it. So this whole idea of getting rescued, really. And so fundamentalism has that in it, this idea of that this is the right way. When you do it this way, it's the right way. And by implication, inference, everything else is wrong. And then there's this false sense of simplicity and this false sense of security.
I'm struck, Aya, by on the surface, your life seems very simple, very secure, very ritualistic, and very fundamentalist. So
It's
what
not
was
fundamentalist at all.
so what was the trajectory inwards? How did that transform into a manifestation that on the surface looks similar to a religious institution that might be very fundamentalist? What was that shift and how is it different?
The difference, you can meet Buddhists that have a fundamentalist leaning, and I tend to call them righteous, but for the most part, I think the whole essence of the Buddha's teaching with Ehipassiko, like come and experience for yourself, that's the antithesis of fundamentalism. So yeah, I do hear what you're saying. And it has been challenging for me in the robes, definitely different aspects, because there have been ways that I've been overreactive to things that I thought were too strict or too arbitrary or too authoritative, or and so it is a prickly area for me, for sure. But in its essence, I think if the teachings are being picked up the way that I feel like that sounds fundamentalist, the way I feel like the Buddhist. I am often around deep practitioners, and I feel the opposite of what I feel when I'm around people that tend to be righteous, too idealistic, fundamentalist. Yeah.
Thank you, Aya. What you've articulated so far sounds like a fairly standard trajectory from someone who's had difficulty with religious institution moving into a more secular approach to Buddhism. What was the pivot point? What's the story that got you into robes and utilizing form, though you obviously hold it different than you did?
That's a great question. I think the thing that was the, catalyst for me, I'll have to say, Ajahn Nisabo, I am someone who got involved in fundamentalist religion. So I very much have it in me. And I think that still was, that part of me still is one of the parts that is why I got into the robes, because it is quite extreme. And but now that I'm in the robes, I feel like a lot of that fundamentalism is being worn away and chipped away and dissolved. I think honestly, spending time at a local vihara forest monastery was pivotal in that. The two senior nuns there, Ayyā Ananda Bodhi and Ayyā Santachita, they're not fundamentalists at all. They're very real. They're very, very real, and they gave me a lot of space, and they they have really big hearts and big minds, and yeah, I think it was essential, the time that I spent with them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I know you often reference the core teachings in the suttas, and I'm curious, since your trajectory took you to these suttas and these teachings, what are one or two teachings which really have come back to you again and again, or which you've held, or that have come up in your mind over and over from the Buddha or from a teacher you know? Either way. That's a hard question, but I'm curious if anything pops into mind.
Well, since I've come to Canmore, I've ended up giving me all these Dhamma reflections. And almost every week I'm like, this is one of my favorite suttas. I always end up saying, sutta is really important. The sutta, yeah. There are just so many. But a sutta that is really special to me is in the middle length discourses, The Grade of the Tamed, the 125, just that description of the Buddha gives a beautiful metaphor of the gradual training and the path. He makes this beautiful metaphor of like training a wild elephant, and there's this key part where the Buddha is talking about the elephant tamer and the way that the elephant tamer speaks to the elephant. And the elephant obviously is our mind, and the elephant tamer obviously is also our mind, our practice. But it's all about it being gentle and lovely and pleasing and agreeable. So just having that inner voice that's really your best friend. I mean, I think there's a part of the path that is just learning to become your own best friend. Ayyā Ahiṃsā would talk about, it's the greatest love story. It's the greatest love. It's the greatest love. And I can remember early on feeling that as I sat down to meditate. Like, this is the most loving thing that I can do for my own mind.
Would you speak more to that in a kind of cultural milieu and narrative where sitting alone can be looked at as a selfish act? And living in robes could be looked at as a selfish act as well, living sort of alone and isolated.
Yeah, I think it takes I guess you'd have to have some buy-in, that we have the potential to actually train our minds. And I think if you accept that premise, I think the Four Noble Truths, I think that there's this premise on the path that no one can make you happy, but no one can make you miserable either. It's that happiness and suffering are arising inside. So I think if you start to open up to that premise and realize like the most loving thing I can do is to purify this system, like clean, first of all, half-lives contain the toxic waste, and then hopefully even turn it into some kind of compost that grows something very, very beautiful. And then you look at beings that have done that, and not necessarily on, Buddhist, but just beings that have actually gotten serious about growing beauty, inner beauty. I mean, look at what Nelson Mandela did, and he spent all that time in prison. Before, when you read what's it called, The Long Road to Freedom, his autobiography. He was a big believer in violence before early on in his rebellion against apartheid. And he was involved in setting off bombs and getting ammunition. And then he spent all that time in prison and became a real believer in, oh my God, the forgiveness that man accomplished. You look at Thich Nhat Hanh, look at, I mean, the list goes on and on.
I feel like you're speaking to something important here. How has that sense of love changed for you over the years? Is it still there, or how is the flavor different? What has your love story been since you ordained? And where do you land now?
It's way less idealistic.
the
It's just way.
honeymoon is over, or not so much?
You know what? It's interesting. The idealism, I think, got in the way of the honeymoon. I think I now have a meditation teacher, Beth Upton, and she gives a definition of metta as acceptance. And I think that's very, very powerful. And so when you start to really accept your own life, all your mistakes, all the harm that you've done, all the harm that's happened to you, when you start to really accept your limitations and your potential, it's very freeing. I feel much more relaxed, less angst. Yeah.
This movement towards softening and forgiveness and acceptance, I'm sure you are as aware as anyone of how common self-recrimination and self-hatred are. What do you say to some practitioner who deeply wants to bring their lives in line with this path, who senses the beauty of the love story, and yet finds that their day-to-day existence is bound by duties of family and work? You've been a mother, you've worked, and they don't feel like they can come into complete alignment. And that sense of friction is perhaps exacerbates that sense of self-recrimination. And what do you tell to someone in a situation like that of not, how do they forgive themselves? How do they forgive their situation? How do they forgive their failures?
That's a great question. I was at a retreat and someone asked Beth Upton about, becoming a mother and their practice. And Beth, to me, it was just such a wise answer. She was like, no matter what, if you choose to become a mother, if you embark on that, make sure that is your practice, that you don't set up a competition between what that involves and formal meditation practice. There's a member of our board, and I won't give too many details, but he has children, and very important work that he does, helping a lot of underprivileged, poor people. But it's very demanding, and he's very good at it. So he ends up being given more and more and more responsibility. And he's also, at one point in his life, he was thinking about being a monk. And so he's the most extreme example I can think of, someone that has the ability and has had the experience of deep meditation, and yet he has a life that is very demanding at this point, and he feels a lot of that conflict and that tension. And right now, he's stopping fighting. He's realizing these are the choices I've made. This is how my life is now. And so this is my practice. His practice right now is developing lots and lots and lots of wholesome parami. And he spends less time than he would like in formal meditation, but he's experiencing more peace, more nourishment from the activities that he is involved in, more connection with his wife, I think, at this point. Yeah, I think it's very important that we don't set up a tension that doesn't actually need to be there. There are times in our practice when, if we have a sick, dying parent, that's our practice at that time. Very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Ayyā.
Yeah.
Would that be your main advice to, say, mothers and fathers? Do you have any little practical Buddhist parenting advice for those listening, or relationship advice? But just curious to sort of, it sounds like turning towards one's life as their practice, obviously, is
Yeah.
as you put it beautifully, and maybe that's the whole of it.
Yeah. And relationship, this is a powerful vehicle. You end up going to places that, if your partner's willing to, where you're really, really, love is the path. And if you're truly trying to love someone fully with all of the things that are irritating to you, and all the ways that you're scared to be vulnerable, like this is important practice. Yeah. And with our children, I really think it's not seeing them in competition with our practice, but seeing them as our practice. My daughter has 2 young children, and she's not a meditator. She's not a practitioner, but she was home with those kids through the pandemic. And I've seen her grow, like parami. I've seen her grow in ways that and I've seen her have some insights into herself and into life and reality and what's important that you expect from someone that's had, long retreat time. I'll just say, I can go as far as to say, Ajahn, but when I started practicing, I was like, how do people meditate that aren't parents? There are lessons that you've learned from being a parent that are invaluable on the cushion. Early days, I'd get a lot of boredom when I was meditating. And I'd think, oh, come on. I used to be able to dig down for my 2-year-old son and my 3-year-old daughter. No one tells you how boring it is being like pushing cars back and forth and dressing paper dolls, mind-numbing boredom. But I would get into it because it was important to be present with this being. And so then I was able to draw on that, be present with my own mind.
I feel like can relate to the terrible two mind and also the uppity 15-year-old. I have both in me. Thank you. One thing I want to I would like to hear your advice for women who do have the opening to possibly look into going forth, what your thoughts would be for them.
You know, that's like your most challenging question so far. Because, you know, if you're male and you're thinking about going forth, it's like, should I go to Harvard? Should I go to Yale? No, I think I'll go to Princeton. You know, I mean, you have these pretty amazing choices. And then if you're female, it's like, will I go to Kwantlen Community College, or should I just do, it online? It's like we just don't have and how could we? Because when you've got any institution, any culture that's been marginalized and experienced erasure, you can't just magic up. You can't just magic up a lineage and a culture and elders. So they're just not there. So honestly, if someone's young, I think there's perhaps look at Asia is one possibility. If someone's not so young and not so healthy, um, it's bit by bit, it's going to get better.
Mm.
So I certainly want to encourage young women, and yet you're as Anagarika Sarah was becoming an Anagarika here, I was feeling really apologetic. Like I'm sorry, you're not stepping into a well-oiled machine. It's just not there. Um, so I think the other thing. So I would say, go and look at all of the potential places and perhaps try and steward at different places. Speak with any ordained women that you can, even email them and ask to have a Zoom. Um, and make sure that you've got a good meditation teacher.
Mm.
I think that's very, very important. And that's not necessarily going to be the resident senior nun. Not necessarily. Not at this. Yeah.
Thank you, Aya. I've always been struck by your ability to speak to this imbalance in the genders in the teachings and in the Sangha. The gendered language you find in the Pali Suttas, but also in the Sangha, the imbalance, with great kindness and speaking to this dichotomy between love and the changes that affects, and um, some of the more, the other ways that one could hold all this. How have you worked with these tensions in yourself, and how have you come to hold, both for just anyone, say the gendered language in the suttas themselves, or in the wider institution, this imbalance between the number of bhikkhunis and bhikkhus and the opportunities available?
I used to be more upset about it, more bothered. I think part of it is because honestly, I hadn't really experienced uh, much misogyny in my life as a woman. I mean, I lived in Canada and I, did what I wanted to do and it had the careers I wanted to have. And then when I came to Buddhism is actually the first time I experienced, uh, yeah, uh, I had, interactions that were like, oh my gosh, that didn't feel nice. Yeah. So initially I was pretty upset. Now I'm not, because now I understand the much. It's not specific to Buddhism. It's just the dynamics when you have uh, someone that has a lot more power and someone that has a lot less power.
Mm.
And honestly, there are aspects of being the person that has less power that are easier. There are some aspects of it that are easier. One is that you're more connected to the truth of it because your life demands it. I mean, ask, and I don't mean to say, I'm hesitant to make this analogy because I think the oppression that, or the lack of opportunities that bhikkhunis face is very minuscule compared to the pain and the suffering of the dynamics in terms of race in the United States. But I just will say, ask a African American how often they think about race, and it'll be many times a day.
Mm.
Ask a white person, and I don't know. They have the luxury. They don't ever have to think about it. It depends on their own heart and conscience. So, yeah, the thing is, the the group that has less power often they end up holding the pain of the situation, because the people with more power often aren't. Uh,
And how does that
but
not lead to bitterness?
because because it's just a dynamic. It's not personal, and you start to see the downside of the group that has more power. They're disconnected from some things, and then you start to feel for that. And then for me specifically as a bhikkhuni, there are just so many monks that I deeply admire and resonate with, that it's not like that. Ajahn Brahm, Ajahn Mali, Bhante Sujato, Bhante Gunaratana, um, Venerable Análio, Ajahn Nisabo, Ajahn Kovalo, yeah, Bhante Sudaso, and so that's just, then you really feel like when I'm with monks that have openly, and deliberately come forward to support full ordination for women. When you're with them, it's just so easy. It's just like being with your brother or being with your uncle. It's so easy. So that also is hugely, hugely supportive and healing, and then just wise attention. So then you just put your attention there.
Mm.
Yeah. And it is a process, and I think you do have to go through the I had to. I'm seeing Anagarika Sarah have to.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ayyā.
Definitely come out the other side for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And this is just for a time, it's all going to change. There's just no question. Yeah.
It has been beautiful to see the various uh, kind of dwellings of bhikkhunis in the Northwest just increase in this last year, and that's been heartening in so many ways. We have some questions from the audience as well. Do you mind giving them a whirl, Ayyā?
Yeah, sure.
All right. If you don't mind, this is a hard one. Sorry. If you don't mind, Ayyā, did you leave your husband to take robes?
No, he left me. He left me about, I maybe 10 years before. Yeah. Yeah, we were, yeah. So no, I was a single parent. Yeah, so that was very clean and easy.
Question. I've heard often about how difficult it is for women who aspire to be monastics. How can we help as lay people to improve the situation and make it easier for women to take up robes?
Well, that is the $1,000,000 question. I'm so happy someone asked that question because actually the lay people have so much power. I think the more that the lay people are bringing it up to monks that aren't actively supporting bhikkhuni ordination, the better.
Hmm.
Ask them about it, and uh, yeah, and perhaps perhaps challenge them even. Yeah.
This one's a slightly different flavor, Ayyā. A question for both venerables. Is this existence real to you or not? I'm going to let you take the first whack at this one, Ayyā.
Well, Ajahn Brahm to me has the best. He says, I mean, obviously, I am not of the camp that thinks all of this is just an illusion. I mean, there's something here. But Ajahn Brahm talks about that what is here is not the self that you take it to be.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's what resonates with me as well as Longpa Panyavado said, that which exists is not real and that which is real does not exist. Because everything in existence we only perceive because there's change. And nibbana, the deathless is how could we perceive it normally because it's changeless. I always found that very beautiful. Someone asked why the teddy bear was sitting next to the Buddha.
Oh, that's probably a good question. I actually moved the Buddha. This is actually the teddy bear's seat in the shrine room. And I moved the Buddha here. So I had a Buddha behind me. But I get it. That could be uncomfortable for someone. So I'm happy to have the teddy bear sit somewhere else
We'll
while
have
the
Bhikkhuni
Buddha.
bear. Bhikkhuni's ears will still stick up.
Yeah.
That's good. While we're waiting for more, or we have a bit longer, but I'm curious. Gosh, there's a few questions I would love to ask. One is, um, how first, if you've kind of had a dry materialist worldview challenged in your life in robes, if you've had kind of experiences which made you question it, or if that one's a bit uncomfortable, I'm curious how you speak about the more esoteric elements of the teaching, such as rebirth or other realms, and do you see how do you approach those teachings which are a bit harder to navigate in the modern contemporary culture?
They seem so obvious to me. uh,
What do you mean?
well, I mean, everything is, I mean, you look at a oak tree and then the seed drops and like everything is cycling. Everything. The whole, yeah. And I think that this is something that's actually an important role for monastics. And I think that this is another, one of the other catalysts for me becoming a monastic, honestly, was the whole situation with Donna.
Hmm.
And early on I was at retreats and I was being explained to me that the teachings were priceless and therefore they were being offered freely, but I paid a registration fee to come to this thing, and then it just seemed quite mixed up. So I think once you take, when things are just, it's just dana, like freely given, then there's more freedom to just read the suttas the way that they are. And certainly you can say to people, like, this is an invitation. Ajahn Tanisaro talks about, working hypothesis. This is very useful, and right now, I have not seen past lives. I am taking this on. But this is how faith works, right? Like you asked me which sutta really speaks to me, the great of the tamed. In that metaphor, the Buddha talks about the elephant, he's spoken to gently by the elephant tamer, and then the elephant tamer gives the elephant fodder, feeds him, and the elephant takes the fodder, and then the elephant tamer knows, okay, now this is going to work. I'm going to be able to tame this elephant. He'll become a king's elephant. He'll live. This is how faith works. You take the teachings on board as a working hypothesis, and then you start to experience the fruit ripening from the practice. And so then okay, well, the Buddha was right about that. And then you start to access deeper experiences in meditation. Okay, well, the Buddha's right about that. And it just goes on down the list. And so the ones that are more, that take deeper and deeper meditation, and that maybe many of us have not yet had firsthand experience of, we're still using it as a working hypothesis.
Thank you for that aligning faith with that moment in that sutta. I had never put those two. I really like that. We have a little bit longer, Ayyā. So another question. What's a lesson you've learned about humans or yourself by moving to Canmore and building a community?
Oh, that's a great question. I think lessons have been reinforced. That no, it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful. This is it's almost a year, and it's definitely my first time. But I'm a really I was a parent. I have 2 children. I have 2 grandchildren. So I have created community before, and just kindness is essential, and safety. The more that people are feeling accepted, I think, just for who they are, and for things to be safe, that's what I've learned. Like that, this is essential. And I think sometimes when the hierarchy is emphasized in my opinion, too much, it can create results, but they're not necessarily based on safety. Some of them are based on fear and pleasing. And so, when we began our community, the first meeting we had, we all came with our top 3 core values. Our top 3 core values in particular in living in a Buddhist intentional community. And there was such overlap, and kindness there for us, many of us, and things being out in the open, things being out in the open, things being named, and then you can work with them. There's nothing, I don't think, that can't get worked through if people are willing to be honest and to take responsibility for their own heart and mind.
I think that's a great place to end. we have more questions, but we're at 6:45, so people are just going to have to join us on Zoom. And Ayyā and Bear Cooney will be joining us on Zoom in a second. And for the record, someone did think Bear Cooney next to the Buddha was sweet, so you have a fan there. Ayyā, thank you so much for joining us, for your friendship, for your example, for your wisdom.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Gosh. Okay.
And I'll post the Zoom link into the chat for those who feel like joining us on Zoom now from 6:45 to 7:30 for, we'll continue the conversation there. If you can't see the chat for whatever reason, just navigate to clearmountainmonastery.org, and halfway down the page, there's a link to Wednesday evenings, and the Zoom link is there. So we'll plan to see, hopefully, many of you there. And Ayyā, please join us again soon in person if you would.
Okay. Great. Great.